Hello and welcome to the Cisco support community. Today we present a live Ask the Expert event inside Cisco Live and Networkers Virtual. During our event today, our expert will be answering your questions on NAC deployment. My name is Daniel Gerson and I am the Content Manager for Cisco Live and Networkers Virtual here at Cisco. Our expert joining me today is Ankur Bajaj, a Senior Technical Support Engineer at Cisco. Welcome, Ankur. Now, I'd like to briefly outline the format for today's Ask the Expert event. Ankur will start with a short presentation on NAC deployment for the first 25 minutes of the program, and then we will dive into the live question submission for the remainder of the event. During our live presentation, you may submit a question to be answered by Ankur and a team of Cisco technical experts using the chat box on the right side of the console. You can scroll up to see previous answers in that same console. The team of technical experts is well versed in NAC deployment, so please begin posting your questions now to give us the best chance of answering them. If you experience any technical issues, please post those questions in the chat box as well. We'll be asking polling questions during this webcast, and we encourage you to participate by answering them. Just by participating in the polling questions, you will be eligible to win a one-year Premier Pass to Cisco Live and Networkers Virtual, which will give you access to hundreds of PDFs and on-demand sessions. Now, let's kick off today's event with a polling question. What is the most important aspect of identity management in your network? Authentication, authorization, posture assessment, remediation, all of them, or other? Please take a moment to answer on the right side and press Submit at the bottom. Remember, you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A box. Now let's get started, and I'll hand over the mic to Ankur.
Hello everyone, my name is Ankur Bajaj and I work for security team at Cisco GC TAC East. Today in this webinar I will be talking about NAC Inband Virtual Gateway Layer 2 deployment, best practices and troubleshooting. Now let me start this presentation with the polling question asked. And my say is during my interaction with customers, I've seen authentication and authorization being the primary aspects of identity management, but this is changing very fast, and up to some extent it has changed to all four of them. And who knows, in future maybe more. Now this is where NAC appliance comes into picture, and this is what we will discuss in this deployment model. So the agenda is we will discuss on NAC components, configuration of Inband Virtual Gateway Layer 2, authentication via LDAP and VLAN, and LDAP attribute-based role mapping, and we will discuss common issues with it. So what is NAC? So Network Admission Control is a technology framework that allows network access to the compliant and trusted PC. Hence, a security admin can trigger scans to all PCs and maybe deny access to the network if found non-compliant, and further provide only access to the resources to meet the requirement. And maybe if there is a guest user, then provide access to only internet and not to the production. Hence, NAC goes beyond identity checking and makes network resistance to attack. So continuing on the previous slide, let's discuss four main things with NAC, which is authentication, authorization, posture assessment, remediation, and I'll spend some time on this with an example. Now first we determine who is logged into the network, and once the authentication is performed, then we will determine what privilege we want to assign to the user depending upon what user role is specified in the authorization. For example, if there is a user who is an employee, another user who is a guest, and maybe another who is a contractor, so for employee user we may want to put him in a role which has complete access to the production network. For contractor role, limited access to the production network, and for guest role, we may just want to open internet access and block everything else. Also, based on the user role, I would like to determine the posture assessment. For example, if it's an employee, then the NAC admin might want to check if the corporate approved antivirus is installed on his PC, and maybe further, what version is it and is it up to date. But if someone is logged in as a contractor or a guest, then we cannot enforce that he has installed our corporate approved antivirus. Hence, we may check on any antivirus or maybe something else. Hence, based on the user role, posture assessment will take place. Now, after performing checks on posture assessment, we determine that the user is non-compliant, then we will put the user in a temporary role, and he will have no access to the network except to the resources required for remediation. For example, if I don't have a certain Microsoft hotfix, then I will only have access to, say, windowsupdate.microsoft.com, or maybe to a corporate server to download the hotfix and nothing else. Now let's discuss the important components in an NAC solution, which are Clean Access Manager, referred as CAM, Clean Access Server, referred as CAS, and Clean Access Agent, referred to as CC Agent. The CAM is used for central administration, monitoring, and configuration of security policies and requirements. And with one CAM, we can manage multiple CAS depending on the license. Also, it can centrally control network devices. For example, in out-of-band deployment, we can do SNMP writes in our access switches. CAM does authentication for users, and this can be done locally or with external databases. CAS is like a policy firewall between the trusted and the untrusted part of the network, and CAS and CAM operate in a team. But CAS is responsible for asking for authentication and posture information from the client PC, and the information is passed to the CAM for checking, and based on the results, the CAM instructs CAS to start enforcing policy for the client. So CAS is always typically or logical in line between the untrusted and the trusted network during the initial posture assessment and remediation. The CCIE agent is a software program that resides on the client PC in the untrusted network, and its job is to collect information about the user and host it is installed on. Once the information is collected, it is sent to CAM via CAS, and if the requirements are met, then untrusted user is considered trusted and allowed access to the network. If it fails, then the CCIE agent can present the user with a dialog box with remediation instructions from the manager. The NAC appliance sizing can be dictated by the license installed, where CAM can be licensed to support CAS from 3 to 40 CAS pairs, and CAS can be licensed from number of users it can support from 100 to 2500 users. Now, after we access the GUI page of the CAM for the first time, we will need to put the license file here for CAM and CAS, and then only we can go further in the configuration. The extension of the license file is .lic, and you browse to the file and click on Install License. Now, once the license is installed, we will see here, like say for example, 1 CAM failover and 3 CAS failover license, or if you have any other license, you will see the information over here. The best practice is while loading the license file, load the manager license first and then the server license, and if we need to replace the license, click in Remove All License and then reinstall the license file. If you remove the license file at any stage, that does not hamper the functionality of the CAS CAM, but we won't be able to manage them from GUI until the license is loaded back. The next steps come adding CAS to the CAM so that we can manage CAS and do its configuration on the CAM. So first, check for SSL certificates and use each 0 IP address of CAS and CAM respectively in the certificate signing request for generating the certificates. And in case of certs based on host name, make sure DNS is configured and is able to resolve the name to the IP address, and in case of HA, high availability, use the service IP or the virtual IP. And I'm going to show the certs config in the coming slides. So once we have the GUI access to the CAS and CAM, then install the root certs of the external CS server. For CAM, go to Administration, CAM SSL, Trusted Certificate Authority, and for CAS you can go to Administration, SSL, Trusted Certificate Authority. Browse to the .cer extension file and import it. So once we submit the certificate signing request to the CA and get the ID certificate, then install it on the X509 certificate tab by browsing to the .cer extension file for the identity certs and import it. So now let me talk about the Inband virtual gateway layer 2 deployment and the configuration, and I'll talk about each of the 3 modes in the coming slides. So the best practice is to determine the following VLANs before we proceed to the configuration. Access or trusted VLAN is our production VLAN, and in this example we have taken it as 77. Authentication or untrusted VLAN is 7, and at this VLAN the end clients are sitting, and we need to check their compliance before allowing access to the production VLAN 77. Management VLANs for CAS and CAM are 199 and 99 respectively and used to manage them. The native VLANs are used to avoid switching loops and for CAS trusted and the untrusted interfaces. And in this deployment, we are using VLAN 666 and 667. I'm going to discuss in the coming slides how all these pieces will fit to each other. So here is our physical connectivity of the deployment. It's a central deployment. We have a core switch, and the core switch connects to an access switch, and the uplink ports between the switches are trunked. Both CAM and CAS are connected to the core switch. The CAS ETH0 is the trusted side of the network, and ETH1 is the untrusted side of the network, and they're connected to the trunk ports of the core switch. By default, the ports on the CAS are 802.1q. Hence, if we connect to the switch port configured as trunking, then multiple VLANs can flow. The access VLAN 77 is on the core switch, and auth VLAN 7 is on the access switch. An important point here is that for any deployment in NAC, the user traffic must flow to the CAS, especially during authentication, posture assessment, and remediation. And in Inband deployment, it flows even after the users are authenticated. Hence, in this deployment, the traffic is always flowing through the CAS. With Virtual Gateway, the CAS is acting like a layer 2 switch, and the end user device in the auth VLAN is layer 2 hops away from CAS. Now, if you see, all user traffic in Authentication VLAN 7 is sent to access switch and then trunked to the core switch. And in the core switch, it is trunked to the untrusted interface, ETH1 of the CAS. And on the CAS, we do VLAN mapping of 7 to 77. Here is the configuration of the switch, and we will assign VLANs as per what we have drafted in the previous slides. In Virtual Gateway deployment, both CAS and CAM have different subnets and the different management VLAN 199 and 99 respectively. And the reason is whenever CAS initiates some traffic, then it will initiate it via the ETH1 interface or the untrusted interface, except for the traffic meant for default gateway. Hence, when CAM and CAS needs to talk, and had they been in the same VLAN and subnet, then the traffic would have gone through ETH1 interface, and the traffic would have never reached to the CAM, as the CAM is on the trusted part of the network. Also, the best practice is to have the management VLAN different than auth and the access VLAN. The switch ports connected to the CAS are trunk ports, and we need to configure dummy native VLANs not used anywhere else to avoid switching loops, because by default all ports on the switch will have the default native VLAN as 1, and the idea is to put these interfaces to another native VLAN to avoid these loops. Also, make sure that we do not allow common VLANs on ETH0 and ETH1 interfaces of the CAS. Now, if you see here, there's an SVI for access VLAN 77 and management VLANs 99 and 199. But there should be no SVI interface for Authentication VLAN 7 anywhere in your network. Also, make sure that the auth VLAN is not trunked to any port in the network, else traffic may leak and not go to the CAS. Now, as long as the user is in VLAN 7, it will be directed to CAS, and it will receive an IP address from the DHCP server in VLAN 77, and default gateway as SVI interface 77, even though it is on VLAN 7. And let me just go to the slide of network diagram and show how this will work. When the PC in VLAN 7 will boot up, it will send a DHCP broadcast packet to the access switch on VLAN 7, and since it is a broadcast, hence access switch is going to forward it to the core switch. Let's say the source MAC address of the packet is ABC, and so the MAC address table will have an entry that the MAC address ABC is learned on port FA0/17 on the core switch, and this broadcast packet is going to be sent to all ports in VLAN 7. And since there is no port on the switch apart from FA0/16 with .1x trunking enabled, hence the packet will go to the CAS ETH1 interface. Now on the CAS we have done a VLAN mapping of 7 to 77 as shown here. The CAS will change the .1x tag of the packet and send it to the trusted interface and forward the packet to the core switch on port FA0/8 in VLAN 77. The source MAC address of the packet is still ABC, but the core switch will create another entry of this MAC address learned on VLAN 77 on port FA0/8. The layer 2 engine of the switch will say, I do have a layer 3 SVI configured for this VLAN and I will forward this DHCP discover packet to it. The MSFC will receive the DHCP discover request on VLAN 77 and the IP helper address command configures on the switch will convert the broadcast packet to the unicast packet and send it to the DHCP server. The DHCP server will think that it has come on VLAN 77 and I need to assign an IP address in that VLAN and will give a DHCP offer with an IP address say 77.77.77. something. The packet will come back to the core switch and hit the SVI, and now the MSFC will send a reply with the destination MAC address as ABC, and the packet will come to the layer 2 engine of the switch. The core switch will check the MAC address table for ABC, forward the packet to the trusted interface of the CAS. The VLAN mapping on the CAS will now convert VLAN 77 to 7 and send it out to the untrusted interface. Again, MAC address table lookup will happen and the packet is forwarded to the access switch and then to the PC in VLAN 7. Hence, PC will receive an IP address from DHCP server in VLAN 77 and the default gateway as SVI interface 77, even though at layer 2 it is on VLAN 7. Now, since we have installed the certs on the CAS and CAM and we have configured the switch, and let's go ahead and add CAS to the CAM so that we can manage and configure it. But before we do that, make sure we disconnect the ETH1 interface of the CAS from switch, because the CAS in virtual gateway is in a bridge mode and we have yet not configured VLAN mapping. Hence, if we connect the ETH1 interface, then it causes switching loops. So open the GUI access to the CAM via https:// and the IP address of the host name /admin. Go to the device management, CCS server, new server, put the IP address of the CAS as 199.199.199.3 in this case, and the server type as virtual gateway. Now, if our core connectivity, the VLANs, certificates all is correct, then we will be able to add it. And if you click manage, then the configuration screen comes. And here is it. You can click on the network tab here, and then the IP address comes. And since this is a virtual gateway deployment, the CAS will act in a bridge mode. Hence, both trusted and untrusted interface has the same IP address, subnet mask and default gateway. And the whole reason we put the address here on the CAS is for managing it from the CAM. Also, we see there is a management VLAN is tagged to 199. So we'll tag the packets to 199 when sending from the trusted interface of the CAS. Now we'll go to the advanced and VLAN mapping and enable VLAN mapping and click on the update and map 7 on untrusted interface to VLAN 77 on the trusted interface and click on add mapping. The next step is manage subnets. Remember, this is a layer 2 deployment and authentication VLAN is layer 2 hops away from CAS, and we need to manage manage subnets in layer 2 deployment only, because when traffic from the end user client hits the CAS, then the CAS needs to be able to get the MAC address of these clients, and in order to do that, CAS needs to ARP on a particular VLAN, and it needs subnet information on that VLAN. And hence we configure the managed subnets. So CAS tracks the end user via MAC address because there is no L3 hop in between CAS and the end clients, and hence it can get the real MAC address from the end clients. Now here, although we call it a managed subnet, but we actually configure an IP address and we use the IP address to ARP in the particular subnet. And it is recommended that the IP address used here should not be in the DHCP scope and not used anywhere else in the network. Also, this IP address is from the trusted VLAN subnet, but the VLAN ID is untrusted VLAN 7 because the end user is in the unauth VLAN 7 and we need to ARP there. And once this is done, we can connect the ETH1 interface to the core switch and start listening to the end user traffic at the CAS. So let's discuss how to establish identity with the end user, and the identity can be achieved by authentication and authorization for the end user. Authentication is achieved by communicating to an external database such as Radius, LDAP, Kerberos, ADSSO, or maybe a local database on the CAM. All the different types of authentication servers are defined by providers, and the default we have is local database. And in this presentation, I'm taking example of LDAP. Hence, we'll check LDAP here with local databases with the auth providers. So this is the configuration of the LDAP, and here CAM is the LDAP client and the AD is the LDAP server. The account that we configure here should have the ability to bind to the LDAP server and query it. Full DN here is the full path to the account, and in this slide we are using administrator account and giving full paths to that account. The search-based context here will tell from where to start the search for any user defined on the AD. Hence, GC-NAC is the top of the tree from where the search will start. We can configure to start search either by email, user account, location, etc., any attribute. And in this example, I'm using user account called SAM account is equal to $user ID. As this is what Windows user has an LDAP attribute, and this is what we will use to search. Now the server URL is going to tell the IP address of the LDAP server. We see a default role configure here as unauthenticated role, and you can configure anything else also if you want. And if none of the mapping conditions are met, then we will configure. We'll configure that later, and the user will be placed to that default role, whatever is set here. Also, to get all this information that we see here, you can install any LDAP browser tool which is open source like Software, and that gives you all the information of AD credentials in LDAP format. Also, if you go to AD and on the DOS command, if you put dsquery space user space -name space the user ID for which you want to search and press enter, then it will give you the full details of full DN and also search-based contact details, which will be in an LDAP format. And you can get that information from LDAP.com and configure here. So once authentication is done, authorization can be granted via role mapping, and we can either do source-based or attribute-based, or maybe compound them for granting roles. Now in this example, we can see there is a compound condition or a regular expression of source VLAN as 7, or LDAP attribute based member function being domain user. If any of these two attribute matches, then put that user in role A. So here's the polling question result. So we have the polling question 2. How can we configure routing on the NAC appliance? Is it by static routes? Do we configure EIGRP, configure RIP, or route maps, or none of the above? So you can answer using the polling box on the right hand side. Some of the common problems that we see in this deployment: cannot add CAS to the CAM. Now check if you can ping from CAS from CAM, or maybe SSH CAS from CAM and vice versa. Make sure that the shared secret keys that are configured during initial setup, or maybe where the command service prefigure config is same on both the devices. And the command for viewing it on version 4.5 and lower is cat/root/.secret, and for version 4.6 and above is cat/root/.profego/secret. Another thing to note here is that the shared secret key will be a hash value. However, if this hash value matches on CAS and CAM, then you can assume that the shared secret has been configured correctly. You can also check the interfaces of the CAS, CAM, and switches. Check the SSL certificates. Make sure that you use the ETH0 IP address of the CAM when generating the certificate for the CAM, and use ETH0 IP address of the CAS. If you're using certificate based on DNS name, make sure that the CAM and the CAS can resolve the domain name DNS name to an IP address. Use service IP addresses or DNS name resolving to the service IP to generate certificates in case of high availability. Also check for licensing in administration, clean access manager license. Now if there is a 3 CAS license and we are trying to add the 4th, then we will get this error message on the event logs as shown on the slides. If there's a firewall in between the CAS and the CAM, then ensure TCP port 443.80.1099 for CAS and port 443.80.8995 and 8996 for CAM are allowed. If the end user is not getting an IP address, so if your agent is not getting the IP address, then we need to check what mode the CAS is in the first place. Is it real IP or is it virtual gateway mode? Is it itself acting as a DHCP server, or is it doing proxy for the external DHCP server? With virtual gateway deployment, CAS is rarely an issue, as in unauthorized role DHCP and DNS is allowed. Check if the access VLAN is trunk to the switch ports where the ETH0 interface is connected. Also, we can check the VLAN mapping is configured correctly. You can see the ARP table on the CAS, especially in this deployment, and any L2 user connected will be identified by the MAC address. And initially, you will see the MAC address but no IP address. So you will know that the DHCP discovery is basically hitting to the CAS, and we might need to look beyond the CAS. So to check the ARP table, you can cat to /proc/click /intron _ARP/table. Another quick way to test DHCP will be to put the end client port in the trusted VLAN, and with that the CAS will bypass, and we will know if the end PC is getting the IP address from the DHCP server or not. So if the user is not directed to the web login page, now say we have the IP address and we are not getting redirected to the login page, and this could be a typical DNS issue. First check the DNS value and see what you have. Also see if you can go to the IP address directly to the CAM and see if you are redirected to the login page through an IP address. Also check if there is no SVI for the auth VLAN, and we don't need an SVI for the auth VLAN in this deployment. And prune auth VLANs from all other links except CAS untrusted. If the users are getting redirected when they open the web page of the CAM but not when they open browser for normal access, then this is a typical case of managed subnets not configured correctly in the virtual gateway deployment. Also, the unauthenticated traffic should be blocked for redirection to happen. This means that if in the unauthenticated role I have opened TCP port 80 and then I'm opening some website, then the redirection will obviously not happen, and the CAS will allow the traffic to flow through. Hence, for redirection to happen, that traffic must be blocked in the untrusted role. So what if the agent is not popping up? If the agent is installed and it gets the IP, but it's not getting popped up, and so now, see, the agent will get popped up only when it's able to communicate with the CAS. First thing to look at if it's a layer 2 or layer 3. If it is layer 2, then UDP 8905 packet will go to the CAS, and if there is no response, then assume that the CAS is then it will assume that the CAS is multiple hops away, and it will initiate 8906 packet with the discovery host. In layer 2 deployment, from client perspective, check if web redirection is working or not, and if web redirection works and the agent does not pop up, then check if the agent is sending UDP port 8905 to the default gateway using some sniffer software like Wireshark. Also check for personal firewall blocking the discovery packet, as this 8905 packet is initiated by the agent within every 5 seconds. So what if our authentication fails? If that happens, we can do an auth test with the LDAP authentication to check if our config of the CAM is good, and we will see a result here, authentication successful or unsuccessful. If it's successful, you will also see role mapping. In this case, the user A Bajaj is getting mapped to role employee. So from here, you know that the configuration on the CAM is good or it's not. For authentication issues with agents, check for certificates, and most of the times it's a search issue. For name-based search, see if the DNS can resolve the name. Also, sync the time on the CAS and CAB for 5-minute lags, and best practices is to set NTP. On the CAS, Perfigo redirect logs are of great help in this scenario. And here are the typical logs that we see in the Perfigo logs where the logging is failing. First, when the CAS is trying to post to the CAM and it is a read timeout, then check if there is a connectivity issue. And we can do multiple pings to see if the packets are getting dropped between the CAS and the CAM. Certificate not yet valid. And this is a time issue, and make sure we have not configured 2005 in 2011. The host did not accept the connection, means that the CAS is posting to the wrong IP address. And go ahead and check the certs and see that the IP address are correct on the certs. If you see in the log here that no trusted certificate found. Now, if the CAS or the CAM is using a third-party cert and both are using the same CA, then we need to have a CA cert in the root trusted cert. And when they will send the ID certs, then they will need a public key to decrypt, and the public key is the root cert to authenticate to each other. So go to the trusted cert and add the root cert of the external CA. Cannot access network after logging in Inband. So in Inband scenario, since we are inline all the time, and since we are moved to some role after authentication, check for the traffic control rules and see what you are allowing. And in this slide, we are allowing all traffic in employee role, but you can restrict according to the role or whatever deployments planning that you have for that role. So to extract the CAM logs, you can open the CLI and get the output of tail --f /perfigo /control /tomcast logs /nac-manager.log and get the real-time logs. Or from GUI, you can go to administration, clean access manager, support logs, and by default the logs are at info level, and we can turn the specific logs or all of them to trace level and download them. Note that the both CAS and CAM, as soon as the devices are going to reboot, all the logs will change to info level. The same concept is with the CAS logging, but here you will see some of the logs are different that you see in the CAM, like SYS and AD communication logs for the obvious reasons as they deal with the CAS. With this, I'm done with the presentation. Let's go ahead with the polling question results. So, which security topic would you like to see in the future webcast? Is it AD SSO on NAC, ACS 5.x, DMVPN, get VPN, out-of-band deployment with NAC.
Okay, let's get started with the Q&A portion of the event. We'll also be sending out a survey later on after we finish the Q&A portion, and the first 10 listeners who fill out that evaluation will receive a $20 Amazon gift card. So please be sure to fill out that survey when we send out the link. And remember, you can keep submitting your questions at any time. Just do so in the panel on the right side. Let's get things started with our first Q&A question. Here's our first question. Is Active Directory supported for authentication?
Yes, Active Directory is supported for authentication, and we can use LDAP interface to do authentication. Also, we have then ability to do AD SSO, and once the user logs in to the domain and it's successful, the NAC agent will pop up and will take the same credentials, and we don't need to re-enter the username and the password. And once it passes all the checks, we will have access to the trusted network.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, moving on to our next question. Can I enable the provider list only for the user page or for the CCA agent as well?
You can do it for CCA agent as well.
Okay. Now let's have a look at our next question. The testing and the roadmap, is this for converged network or for 10G?
I'm not sure on that for now. Let me just check that and get back on that.
Okay. And Ankur will be answering questions off the Cisco Support Community Forum site. So any questions that don't get answered, please check back, as he will be there over the next 2 weeks. Okay, let's go back to our next question. Can CAM integrate with multiple forest environment?
Yes, it can. You can have once you do ADSSO, you can have multiple domains connected to the CAM.
All right, next question. Is logging to an external syslog server possible?
Yes, it is possible. When you do syslogging to the multiple syslog, by default you cannot send it to the external syslog, but you have a function which I don't recall for now, and you can send the logs to that external syslog server.
Excellent, thank you. Here's our next question. Is it possible to prevent any end user to uncheck the pop-up login window settings at the NAC agent?
I'm not sure if that is possible, because as long as the NAC agent will get an IP address, the NIC drivers will get initiated, and it will send and it will enable the agents to pop up.
Okay. Our next question. Are any public CA certifications by default available?
They are not on the CAS and the CAM. We need to pull them up. Once you initialize the CAS and the CAM, by default we need to put the self-signed certs to bring the CAM up, and once the CAM GUI is up, then we can put the external CA certificates, both the identity certs and the root cert to the CAS and the CAM.
Okay, thank you. Here's our next question. If a user is unable to log in, where can I refer the logs in CAM or CAS to check what is wrong?
So if the user is not able to log in, like we discussed in the presentation, we can do the tail -F, and we can go to the NAC _ manager logs and the NAC _ server logs on the respective CAM and the CAS, and we can generate the logs from there during real time. Also on the agent, we can extract the logs from the CCIE agent, what is happening at that time. The CCIE agent logs needs to be sent to the TAC, and there's a tool that we use to decode them, and we might see there what's happening at the end. But really it's at the CAS, at the CAM, that we need to turn on the logging at trace level and see what's happening, and from there we can get information. Also, if you go on the CAM and if you do the auth test, then we can basically see if the configuration on the CAM is correct, and if everything is fine in the config path of authentication, then you will see a successful logging on the CAM, and from there we can also see to what role that user is getting mapped to.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Can you further explain the out-of-band log-off feature, please?
Okay, so the out-of-band log-off feature is basically applied to the NAC agent. With out-of-band log-off feature, basically we enable it when we have a user connected to the IP phone, and once we click on this log-off feature, then the link down trap is not sent, because we don't want the switch to receive that, because if we receive that, then the link of the IP phone will go down. So we enable this feature, but there are some but to enable this feature we need some more things to be configured, and let me just give you a brief on that. Basically with log-off feature we need the VLAN detect interval also to be checked. Also, I've seen in the deployment where the ACLs are used, then the out-of-band log-off feature does not work well. We need to use policy-based routing in that case, and this feature is available with I think it's 4.8.1. We need to have both the CAS, CAM, and the agent to be running 4.8.1.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Here's another question. What is the relevance of the different timers associated with NAC, like session timer, heartbeat timer, and CDL timer?
The session timer is an absolute timer that is specific to the user role and has a built-in value of 5 minutes that gets added to the configured session timeout in the user role. So basically, for example, there is a user A and a user B, say belonging to role employee, and has a session timer say set to 115 minutes. And say both the users are logged in, both the users will be logged out exactly after 120 minutes, which is like 2 hours, and regardless of whether the connection status of the activity. Now, CAS will maintain an ARP table for its untrusted site by sending an ARP query. So the heartbeat timer sets the number of minutes after which a user is logged off the network if unresponsive to the ARP queries from the clean access server. This feature basically enables the CAS to detect and disconnect users who have left the network, which can be shutting down or suspending the machine without actually logging off the network. Certified device list timer is configured to automatically clear the certified device list at a specific interval. Like I've seen customers using this option to clear the list every 24 hours, like say 10 p.m. in the night when they know that most of the users have logged out, and hence next day the agent pops up again, and when the user re-logins to the network.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to our next question. Will ISE replace NAC, or is it a complement?
Well, I said it's a complement because most of the ISC functionalities are also based on ACS 5.x. So for now, I'll say it will go beyond NAC, and it will have much more features in ISC, especially the logging. The logging is quite excellent in ISC, and I'm sure in future roadmaps, new functionalities will be added. But for now, what I'm aware of, it's pretty much on the lines of ACS 5.x plus NAC.
Okay, we've got time for just a few more questions. What is the best practice when you want to deploy NAC in a central site and a branch office? Would you recommend in-band or out-of-band?
Well, it depends on the requirement. In-band is, to me, is the most easiest of the deployments, and we can have all the traffic going through the CAS all the time. It's easy to manage and troubleshoot. With out-of-band, the traffic is in-band during the initial authentication, posture assessment, and remediation, and once it's authenticated, the CAM will basically take over, and it will set the SNMPs and change the switch port on the access switches to the trusted VLAN. But the good part with out-of-band is that you will have a higher speed because the traffic will basically flow direct from the access switch to the core switch, and you will get high switching speed. So basically, with out-of-band, the NAC server is no longer a bottleneck. It will just go through the wire. Another thing with out-of-band is you need to manage it and make sure that the configuration and the planning is all set before you deploy out-of-band. So it depends on what kind of deployment you have. But if you ask me, out-of-band will go with those requirements wherein speed and you need to converge your network on the actual switching. But if you want all the traffic to go through the CAS, you can go with in-band. Also for WAN connections, VPN connections, and wireless deployments, I've seen more of in-band.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to our last question. And before I get to that, I just want to remind everyone that we just pushed out the survey link, and it's over in the chat window. Please do take a moment to fill out that survey, as it will help us address your business needs in the future, as well as you will have a chance to win that $20 Amazon gift card for the first 20 people who do fill it out. Our last question that we have here tonight. Can we run dynamic routing protocol on the NAC device?
No, we cannot run a dynamic routing protocol on the NAC device, and there is no plan as of now for it. For all L3 deployments, we do static routes and configure static routes, be it on the trusted side or on the untrusted side of the NAC server.
Excellent. Thank you, Ankur. And just want to reiterate that Ankur will be available on the Cisco Support Community's website at the link you see here. You can quickly get to that at supportforums.cisco.com, and it will be answering questions over the next 2 weeks. So if you do come up with any other questions, please be sure to stop back there and get your questions answered. Also, the Cisco Support Community does have a new iPhone app. Please do check it out. There is a contest involved, so please do have a look at that and see if you can win some prizes. Also, just want to let you know. I'm sorry? Yes, just want to let you know as well as our next upcoming webinar. It's all about IPv6, and are you prepared? What should you do? It is coming up on June 8th, 2011. So please do check back at our next webinar. That one will take place on May 17th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and we'll see you at our next webinar.